Imagine a girl born out of the passionate desire of a king who went against the entire Christian church, defied the Pope and the whole world for one thing, a son and heir. But fate gave him a daughter, a girl who was intelligent, educated, and observant. Her name was Mary. Her life, from her first cry to her last breath, became a spiral of betrayal, fear, loneliness, and illness. She was not just a queen. She became a living warning about the price of power for women. Do you know the story of the queen who began to decay while she was still alive? Today we will delve into the almost unbelievable tragedy of Mary Tudor, known as Mary Bloody. But few know that behind this cruel nickname and the stakes of the stake lay a broken woman consumed by hatred, remorse, and illness so terrible that her body began to rot even before her death. Mary Tudor was born in 1516. She was the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. From an early age, she was raised as a princess, but at the same time as a political tool. She studied Latin, Greek, music, and astronomy. Without a doubt, she was one of the most educated women of her time. However, everything changed when her father became obsessed with having a son. Realizing that Catherine could not give him an heir, he rejected her, and along with her, he rejected his daughter. Mary's childhood ended in an instant. She was declared illegitimate. Her mother was exiled, and Mary was stripped of her title, her sense of security, and her familiar life. Princess Mary became simply Lady Mary. This was not just a symbolic gesture, it was a humiliation that caused real pain. Henry married Anne Boleyn, and Mary was forced to acknowledge that she no longer had any claim to the throne, and that the king's new daughter, Elizabeth, was the rightful heir. This was not just public humiliation for her, but a real internal torment. The silence of the palace, the closed doors, the servants who no longer looked her in the eye. Everything around her seemed to scream, "You are no longer important." But Mary held on. She clung to her Catholic faith and the image of her mother with desperate determination. It was not a strategy, but a last-ditch attempt to preserve at least something inside herself because everything outside was falling apart. Time spared no one. Henry continued to marry. Anne Boleyn was executed. Elizabeth was also temporarily declared illegitimate. The court became a minefield of intrigue, religious conflict, and political struggle. As an adult, Mary remained without rights, without power, without allies. She had only one support left, her faith. And it was this that became both her salvation and her downfall. After Henry's death, the throne was taken by her half-brother, Edward VI. He was a staunch Protestant and dreamed of completely eradicating Catholicism from England. Mary was a living reminder of the old faith. She was forbidden to attend Mass. She was watched, distrusted, and isolated. Then something unexpected happened. Edward died young in 1553. The vacant throne was offered to 16-year-old Jane Grey, a Protestant who was convenient for influential circles. But the people made a different choice. To everyone's surprise, the very woman who had been kept in the shadows for years, the one who was considered illegitimate, was raised up by the common people, not out of love, but out of hope. The people longed for order, stability, and above all, a return to the Catholic faith. Mary, then 37 years old, mounted a horse like an ancient warrior and set off for London. She entered the capital as a queen. Her welcome was triumphant, but beneath the scarlet cloak and sparkling crown lay a tortured, inflamed, and fragile body, and her soul was wounded by years of pain. Obsessed with a sense of duty and punishment from her very first day on the throne, Mary faced the same problem that had once ruined her father, the question of succession. Her age reminded her that she needed to marry and produce an heir, but her decision was dictated not by feelings, but by political calculation. She chose Philip II, son of Emperor Charles V. The English people were horrified. No one wanted a foreigner to rule the country. People feared that they would be drawn into the wars of the Habsburg dynasty. Parliament resisted, the nobility plotted, and rebellions broke out. But Mary did not back down. She was convinced that it was her duty to restore Catholicism, and to do so, she needed to form the most powerful alliance in Europe, with Spain. So in 1544, Mary married Philip. Soon she announced that she was pregnant. Bells rang. The people rejoiced. At last a Catholic dynasty was being born. But months passed, and there was no birth. Her belly grew, her breasts swelled. She felt all the signs of pregnancy, but there was no baby. No movement, no signs of life. The doctors could not explain it. People began to whisper that it was all a hoax. The supposed pregnancy lasted more than 11 months, and then, just as it had appeared, it disappeared. Maria disappeared from public view. She withdrew into herself and began to break down, both physically and mentally. The Queen's body was sending out alarm signals: abdominal pain, swelling, fever, discharge. She began to smell foul. Her skin changed color. She often lost consciousness, and she vomited bile. The doctors remained silent. They began to fear the worst, but Mary continued to believe that God was testing her. However, her decisions became increasingly harsh. Thus began one of the darkest chapters in English history. For Mary, her failed pregnancy was not a medical condition. She considered it a punishment from above. In her eyes, God was punishing her for her softness. Being just a queen was not enough. She had to become a messenger from heaven, and that meant cleansing England of heresy. So flames became politics, and bonfires became doctrine. The queen, who had once been greeted with ovations, was now feared. From 1505 to 1558, more than 280 people were burned alive for refusing to renounce their Protestant faith. Men, women, old people, and even young people. These were not enemies on the battlefield, they were ordinary people. Many of them were poor, barely able to read, but they believed. And for that, they burned. The smell of burning bodies mingled with Latin prayers and the cries of loved ones. Mary was not present at the executions, but she knew the names of every condemned person, every person burned, every stake. She felt no cruelty, only duty. For her, these deaths were necessary to save souls, to purify the kingdom, to restore divine order. But the people began to call her Mary the Bloody, not only because of the pyres, but also because of what was happening to her body. The court physicians watched in silence. She had constant internal inflammation. Her stomach swelled and deflated like a deflated balloon. Her breathing became heavy and sour, as if everything inside her was rotting. The queen did not leave her chambers for hours. Sometimes she was not seen for several days. Her face grew pale, her lips cracked, and her skin changed. First a grayish tint appeared on her hands, then purple spots appeared on her legs and arms. Finally, a dark liquid began to ooze from her abdomen. Philip, her husband, noticed her deteriorating condition, but he was rarely in England. After the failed pregnancy, he returned to his affairs in Spain, leaving Mary alone. And loneliness became a fog that covered everything: the court, the church, and the Queen's own heart. Isolated, Mary tightened her repression. Every letter she wrote now spoke of only one thing: duty, God who punishes when necessary. In her mind, there was no room for love or doubt. But inside, her body became a real battlefield. She often bled. Her temperature rose suddenly, and then something even more disturbing appeared. She began to talk to people whom no one else could see. Male voices could be heard in her chambers, and she apologized to her mother, and sometimes even to her father. The court physicians, observing the strictest secrecy, began to record unusual symptoms: pus on her gums, excruciating pain in her lower abdomen, and a foul odor coming from her mouth, and the most terrible guess, which no one dared to voice aloud, internal gangrene. In the 16th century, gangrene was a death sentence. When an organ begins to rot from the inside, the body tries to get rid of it. But without antibiotics and modern surgery, the toxins simply poison the entire body. This would explain the constant dizziness, vomiting, nauseating smell, and greenish tinge to the skin that sometimes appeared. And yet, in 1557, Mary announced that she was pregnant again. Her belly began to grow, preparations were made for the birth, and a wet nurse was appointed. This time, everyone was more cautious, but the illusion did not last long. The belly deflated. There was no baby. There was no birth. A heavy silence fell over the palace. No one dared to meet the queen's gaze. No one uttered the word that hung in the air: hysteria, or worse, tumor. The second false pregnancy dealt the final blow to her reputation. Crowds no longer gathered to see her. In Parliament, talk began of an heir, and Elizabeth herself, her half-sister, began to be seen as the inevitable alternative. Mary realized that she would never have children. This thought broke her completely. In desperation, she gave Philip the port of Calais, the last English stronghold in France. This was a national humiliation, a symbol of defeat, a painful wound to the country's pride. But for Mary, it was a gesture of love, an attempt to regain her husband's attention. However, Philip did not return. Night fell on her kingdom, a night without dawn, and Mary, like her body, began to decay in spirit. She no longer left the palace. She wrapped herself in heavy cloaks and used strong perfumes that could not mask the smell of disease. Her hair, once red like her mother's, fell out in clumps. Her skin became translucent and covered with sores, which doctors tried to soften with herbal ointments. At court, it was said that her blood was no longer blood, but a thick, almost black liquid. Her belly swelled like a rotten pumpkin. Some servants swore that they heard her crying at night. Others said that she spoke loudly to the baby Jesus, asking him for forgiveness. But that was not all. The end was near. The slow, painful, humiliating death of a queen who believed that God was on her side, but in the end was left with only her faith as her only shield against her rotting body and an indifferent world. While the doctors prepared her bed for her final agony, the eyes of the entire kingdom were fixed on another figure: Elizabeth. Her sister's shadow grew, while Mary faded away. The halls of St. James's Palace turned into silent crypts. The queen lived in semi-darkness. The curtains were not drawn. The mirrors were covered with dark cloths. The sound of her footsteps, once confident and majestic, became a barely audible rustle. Mary no longer walked. She seemed to glide like a ghost. The few who saw her noted the eerie changes. Her back was hunched, her fingers were swollen, and her nails were turning blue. Gangrene was progressing. Her belly continued to grow, not from a child, but from a tumor rotting inside her. Some doctors no longer hid their diagnosis: a tumor in the uterus. The tumor was probably malignant. Uterine or ovarian cancer, a death sentence in the harsh reality of the 16th century. Maria had a constant fever, convulsions, and her breath poisoned the air, a mixture of bile, rot, and blood. It was even said that her tears smelled of decay, as if every liquid trace of her body bore the mark of living rot. The stench was so bad that the servants had to air out the corridors, burn incense, and place vessels of vinegar in the corners. But nothing helped. In essence, Mary was already dead. Only her proud, stubborn heart refused to stop beating. Tension reigned in the palace. No one knew what to do. No one dared to say the obvious. The queen was dying. Meanwhile, her sister Elizabeth, a Protestant, the very young woman who had previously been interrogated, humiliated, and kept under surveillance, was now gaining more and more respect in the corridors. The same nobles who had previously bowed their knees before Mary now bowed their heads before Elizabeth, still behind her back, but getting closer. And Mary knew it. She felt it in the silence that fell when she appeared, in the letters that disappeared from her desk, in the faces that turned away from her gaze. Power was slipping through her fingers like blood soaking into the night sheets. She spoke to her mother, Catherine of Aragon, as if she were there. She whispered, "I have failed you, Mother. I have not saved your legacy." Sometimes she uttered the names of the martyrs burned at her command and asked them for forgiveness. At other times, she raved, claiming that she was still able to give birth, that the baby Jesus would give her an heir if she showed enough faith. But her faith was drowning. The doctors tried everything: bloodletting, mercury tinctures, resins, poultices. Nothing helped. One of them, in desperation, smeared her swollen belly with an ointment made of animal fat and vinegar. Upon contact, the skin swelled, became covered with ulcers, and secreted a black, foul-smelling liquid that poisoned the room for several days. And yet Mary did not die. It was as if her soul was clinging to her decaying body. It was as if she still believed that her mission, despite betrayal, failure, and illness, was not yet complete. She refused to renounce the throne. She refused to give up. Until the very last moment, she strove to rule, to command, to sign, to make decisions. But she no longer had a voice, a steady hand, or a clear mind. The royal council began to act without her. They consulted with Elizabeth, prepared documents, and divided positions without informing Mary. Decisions were sealed with her name, but not her will. She, the queen, had become an empty shell, a shadow, a living corpse on the throne. But history does not forgive, especially those in power who are in decline. The people who once welcomed her now despised her. Cruel jokes about her rotting belly were told on the streets. Mocking songs were sung in which she was portrayed as a witch, barren and possessed. The nickname Bloody Mary was now associated not only with bonfires, but also with the crimson hue of her dying skin. One morning, a young doctor, secretly brought from Scotland, asked to examine the queen alone. Her chambers were deathly silent. Mary was asleep. Her face was covered with a damp cloth. The doctor lifted the cloth with trembling hands, and what he saw haunted him for the rest of his life. The skin on her body was torn, there were greenish spots on her neck, open sores on her hands, and the air was filled with the sour smell of decay, so strong that it made him vomit. Her stomach was convulsing as if trying to push out something that could not come out. But worst of all were her eyes, half open, dry, tearless, lifeless, staring into the void. Outside, Elizabeth was already waiting, not out of love for her sister, but out of a sense of duty. She was to become the new queen. And with her accession to the throne, the old Catholic England would come to an end. The bonfires would come to an end. Mary would come to an end, but not quite yet. In a final gesture of defiance, Mary asked to receive the last rites. She was given communion and anointed amid the stench by the fading light of candles and a silver cross that blackened in her weakened hands. She could barely speak, but managed to whisper, "May God accept me and forgive me." Her confessor later said that he had never seen a soul so desperate for redemption. The bed was covered with white sheets. The walls were hung with religious images. Complete silence reigned. Death was already everywhere, in every shadow, in every breath. Only one breath remained, the one that would end a reign full of blood, fire, and unbearable suffering. And so, On a gray autumn morning, when the palace gardens were covered with copper-colored leaves, Mary's body shuddered in a final spasm. This spasm was almost imperceptible, a quiet crack in her bones, a breath held in her chest. Her fingers clung to the cross as if trying to hold on to the faith that had accompanied her to the very edge of the grave. And then, silence. Queen Mary Tudor, the first to bear that name, daughter of Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII, breathed her last on the morning of November 17, 1558. At that moment, the silence became absolute. No bells rang, no one cried. Only the stench of her decomposing body, swollen and blue, remained as the last witness to her life, full of pain, fanaticism, and loneliness. The death was not immediately announced in the palace. The situation had to be prepared. The doors were sealed, messengers were secretly sent out, and the funeral ceremony was planned. But relief was already spreading among the stone walls. Whispers spread like wildfire. "The Queen is dead! The bloody one is dead!" Elizabeth, her half-sister, received the news calmly with composure. She was in Hatfield when a messenger approached her. They say that upon hearing the words, she looked up at the sky, knelt down on the cold grass, and whispered in Latin, "This is from the Lord, and it is wonderful in our eyes." But behind this pious phrase lay a restrained smile. The throne was finally hers. Meanwhile, Mary's body was entering the final stage of decomposition. The doctors ordered that it be embalmed, but when they opened the corpse, they saw a terrible sight. The abdomen was full of dark pus and coagulated blood. The intestines looked burnt. The tissues were in a state of deep decay. No one could explain how she had survived for so many months. The uterus, inflamed and rotten, burst when they tried to remove it. It seemed as if the body had been rotting from the inside for months, but had not surrendered to death. Her face, distorted by suffering, was covered with scented cloth. Her eyes were closed, but they could not erase the expression of horror frozen on her features. It was the face of a person who had looked into the abyss. Outside the palace, London celebrated cautiously but joyfully. Protestant churches were filled with worshippers. Some Catholics mourned her in silence. They understood that their era was over, but most felt relief. The women who had lit the fires, the women who wanted to return England to Rome, the women who dreamed of giving birth to an heir through miracle and blood, they no longer existed. The funeral was organized quickly. The coffin was sealed tightly, for fear that the stench would make the participants in the procession sick. People covered their faces with vinegar-soaked handkerchiefs. The hearse, draped in black velvet and bearing the coat of arms, was driven through the streets to Westminster Abbey. But unlike other royal funerals, the people did not weep. They did not throw flowers. They did not pray reverently. Many came out of a sense of duty rather than grief, and the throne, meanwhile, passed into other hands. Elizabeth was proclaimed queen with impeccable solemnity. Her entry into London was a procession of jubilation. The people shouted her name, the streets were lit by torches, hymns rang out, and the city was ablaze with color. A new era had begun. An era without bonfires, without scourges, without imaginary pregnancies. An era of youth, agility, and renewed power. Elizabeth's reign would be long, brilliant, and awe-inspiring, but her accession to the throne would forever be marked by the image of her sister, a woman destroyed by faith, duty, and her own body. In the shadows of the new palace, people still remembered the dead queen. Some servants swore that at night they heard slow footsteps and moans in the corridors. They said that Mary's soul had not found peace, and perhaps that was true. Her legacy was controversial. She was a devout, stubborn, and indomitable queen. She loved her mother dearly and tried to restore her dignity. But she was also ruthless. She unleashed religious persecution with such fanaticism that it shocked even her allies. She killed in the name of faith without hesitation. The nickname Bloody Mary was not invented by Protestants. It was an accurate portrait of a monarch who chose the cross as her sword. Modern medicine has attempted to explain her slow and horrific death. Some believed she had uterine cancer. Others spoke of a massive ovarian cyst or severe dropsy. Still others suggested that she suffered from a prolonged false pregnancy, driven mad by her passionate desire to become a mother. One thing is certain: her body was decomposing while she was still alive. Her stench filled the palaces. Her faith led her to complete isolation. And yet Mary never repented. Until the very end, she defended her right to rule according to her conscience. She did not ask for forgiveness for the fires. She never doubted her divine mission. She died convinced that her suffering had meaning, that it was part of the sacrifice she was making to God. Her rotting body, her corrupted blood, all of it, she believed, was a sacrifice. Mary the Pre, Queen of England, was no ordinary monarch. She became a martyr to herself, a queen of faith that consumed her, a woman pierced by fear, desire, and guilt. And above all, she remained a tragic reminder that power intertwined with fanaticism destroys not only kingdoms, it decays bodies. But history does not stop. While Mary's body turned to dust, the world kept turning. New wars, new alliances, new betrayals. The crown, now on Elizabeth's head, weighed the same, but it had passed into different hands with a different meaning. And yet something remained, something that neither death, decay, nor oblivion could erase. Despite being buried with full royal honors, MaryI did not find peace even after death. Her grave was shared with another queen, her sister and successor, Elizabeth III. Two women divided by irreconcilable ideologies and bloodshed in the name of opposing gods now rest under the same slab in Westminster Abbey. The inscription on the tomb does not mention Mary's name. It simply reads, Reginae Elizabethae et Mariae Sorores in spe resurrectionis, to Queens Elizabeth and Mary, sisters in the hope of resurrection. For many, this tomb is an irony of fate. A woman who fought all her life for the restoration of the Catholic faith was buried under the glory of the Protestant who took her throne. But the silence of the grave could not drown out her echo. In the decades that followed, her image was distorted, feared, and cursed. Protestant propaganda quickly immortalized her as a monster. Pamphlets, sermons, and folk poems portrayed her as a bloodthirsty witch, a fanatic, a woman hungry for death, a queen who boiled her enemies alive, a woman who burned innocence for pleasure, a woman who died mutilated and disfigured. Everything was exaggerated. Everything was distorted. But much of it was true. Mary became a symbol, a ghost haunting the New England. Even Elizabeth, sitting on her golden throne, could not escape her shadow. Every time she made a decision to avoid extremes, she remembered her sister. She knew that Mary's mistakes were lessons for her. And so Mary's decaying body continued to rule from beyond the grave as an eternal warning. In the centuries that followed, Catholic historians tried to restore her reputation. They described Mary as a woman who was misunderstood, betrayed, and tormented by unbearable physical suffering. As a queen who wanted to redeem her tarnished dynasty, restore justice for her mother, Catherine of Aragon, and restore her country's honor through faith. But these voices were weak against the backdrop of her nickname, Bloody Mary. This nickname did not come about by accident. During her reign, more than 280 people were executed for religious reasons. Most were burned alive. Men, women, old people, teenagers, turned into living torches before a shocked crowd. Many of them were simple peasants whose only crime was reading the Bible in their own language. Maria did not forgive. Every pyre she lit was an act of power, but also an act of fear, because Maria was afraid. She was afraid of God. She was afraid of the people. She was afraid of emptiness. The authorities did not free her. They imprisoned her in a labyrinth of guilt and visions. She believed that her infertility was a punishment from above, that her sick body was proof of her inadequacy. That only suffering could cleanse her soul and the soul of the entire country. So pain turned into politics and her barren womb into another burning pyre. Beyond the flames and moans, her main mark on history was perhaps a terrible reminder of what happens when power becomes repentance. She did not rule for herself, not for the people. She ruled as a daughter who wanted to please her ghostly mother. As a believer, she sought to buy forgiveness from heaven, and that destroyed her. Her body became a mere reflection of her inner ruin. The sores, the smells, the deformities were outward signs of the torment that burned her from within. In many ways, Maria destroyed herself. Faith did not save her. It consumed her, and her desire for redemption turned into a curse. Rumors of her death lived on for generations. In the dark corners of palaces, stories were still told about the stench she left behind, about the stains her body left on fabrics, about how horses refused to pull her hearse. Some claimed that her heart was found black and hard as stone. Others said that her soul had not left the castle, and that at night her footsteps could be heard shuffling through the corridors. The people did not forget. In oral tradition, Maria became a warning. Mothers frightened their children with her name. Priests mentioned her as an example of what happens when faith turns into punishment. In the collective memory, her image was mixed with other cursed queens, women who paid a terrible price for daring to challenge the order of their time. But it wasn't all fear. There were those who secretly admired her strength, her ability to hold on to the crown amid chaos, her determination not to back down, even in the face of humiliation or illness, her unconditional loyalty to her beliefs. Mary was feared, yes, but she was unyielding, and that, deep down, commands respect. And yet the damage was done. History turned her into a dark legend. This legend seeped into books, art, and culture. MaryI was no longer just a queen. She became a warning, a nightmare with a crown, a figure shrouded in flames. She sought forgiveness not for the blood of others, but for something she herself could not articulate, for the fact that her body had betrayed her, for the fact that she could not be who she was meant to be. She sought forgiveness for the very fact of her pain. Today, when people come to Westminster Abbey, few linger at her grave. Everyone goes to Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, the mother of the empire. But beneath the feet of these visitors lies another woman, the one who loved to the point of despair, the one who prayed until she was beside herself, the one who died rotting from the inside out, a queen whose tragedy was that she was born in the wrong time and was consumed by her own faith. But the story doesn't end there, because the echoes of the past don't fade so easily. Mary's name continued to be heard centuries later, in legends, superstitions, and political warnings. Her story did not end with her last breath. Over time, the image of Mary Tudor became a symbolic reflection of the female body, doomed to punishment. She was not just a queen defeated by politics or religion. She was a woman whose body ceased to be a source of life and became a prison, a battlefield, an object of public discussion. Her belly became the subject of national debate. Her fevers were a cause for prayer. Her ulcers were signs from heaven or hell. Mary was denied the right to privacy, even in her death throes. In those days, it was believed that the monarch's body reflected the health of the kingdom. And when Mary fell ill, when her body swelled, when her inside stopped obeying her, Many saw it as a bad sign. How could a woman who was unable to control her own body rule England? What did a throne drenched in barren blood mean? Women, especially queens, were perceived as vessels of divine fertility. A female body incapable of producing an heir was considered a defeated body. So when Mary announced her pregnancy in 1554, the kingdom was filled with hope. The Tudor dynasty would continue. The future was secure. But as the months passed and there was no birth, only rumors and seclusion remained. The supposed conception vanished, as if in mockery. The queen went into hiding. Her belly deflated again. Some said she had secretly lost the child. Others said she had never been pregnant at all. Still, others whispered that the devil himself was laughing in her womb. Modern research suggests that Mary suffered from an ovarian tumor or a severe hormonal disorder that caused pregnancy symptoms. But in the eyes of the court and the people, she became a woman defeated by her own body, a woman incapable of fulfilling her primary purpose. Her illness only worsened in the last months. Mary experienced unbearable abdominal pain, fever at night, swelling of the legs, and festering ulcers. The doctors did not know what to do. Any treatment made her condition worse. The pus oozing from her legs filled the rooms with a pungent odor. Some courtiers refused to describe what they saw out of respect, but even the sparse chronicles hint at the horrific situation. The Queen of England was literally decomposing while still alive. The causes of her death are still debated. Various theories have been put forward: uterine cancer, chronic pyelonephritis, tuberculosis, even porphyria. But beyond the diagnosis, something else is important: what this destruction meant for her image. The Queen's body became visible, almost theatrical proof of divine punishment. Her enemies claimed that God had turned away from her, that her fanatical faith had not protected her, that heaven itself had risen up against her. For a woman whose entire life had been steeped in piety, such physical punishment was devastating. Mary did not simply suffer. She believed she deserved to suffer. In her final weeks, she prayed for long periods, fasted, and asked for forgiveness. It was said that her confessor spent more time with her than the doctors. The Queen spoke of her sins with despair, but she did not mention the fires. Mary did not repent of the fires, but she repented of the hatred she harbored, of her rage toward her sister Elizabeth, of her jealousy, in fear, in resentment. She died entangled in a tangle of unconscious feelings, as if her soul was writhing in unison with her decaying body. Those who were close to her knew that the end was near, but few really mourned her. The whole kingdom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her agony to end. For with her death, it was not just a queen who was passing away, but an entire era of fear and fire. On November 17, 1558, Mary finally breathed her last breath. Some said that she died whispering her mother's name, Catherine. Others claimed that her lips uttered Jesus. And some witnesses insisted that in her last second, her eyes flew open and were filled with terror, as if she had seen something on the other side that frightened her. When her death was announced, there was no crying in the streets. There was no general mourning. On the contrary, many celebrated. Bells rang in honor of the new Queen Elizabeth, not the deceased. Parliament declared days of rejoicing. Catholicism gradually disappeared from state ceremonies. And in just a few weeks, the bonfires that had marked Mary's reign were extinguished forever. But her mark remained in the shadows. Mary forever engraved her name in English history, not through conquests or cultural heritage, but through her frighteningly straightforward demonstration of the price of faith without compassion. Her body became an altar on which a worldview that had proven untenable was sacrificed, and this image, of a queen destroyed from within and without, never completely disappeared. Since then, all the queens who came after her, Elizabeth, Anne, Victoria, have ruled knowing that their bodies, their fertility, their image would always be under scrutiny, always interpreted, weighed, discussed. And although they did not speak of it, each carried the ghost of Mary behind her, as a warning, as a shadow, as a mirror. The queen who rotted alive was not forgotten. She was feared. She was remembered. And in the depths of the English national consciousness, her image merged with the very concept of religious horror and female vulnerability in power. But that's not all, because Mary's final sentence is not contained in books, not in the fires, nor in her rotting body. It is hidden in the invisible wounds she left on the conscience of the nation. When Mary's body was finally laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, there was no sense of grandeur in the air. Her coffin was covered with a red cloth, a symbol of martyrdom. But her legacy did not meet with the solemnity she had hoped for. England was already looking to the future, to a new era, embodied by her half-sister Elizabeth. And with that, the memory of Mary began to be distorted, rewritten, transformed. In the years that followed, her image was deliberately turned into a symbol of horror. Under Elizabeth's Protestant regime, a new narrative was created. Mary was not a martyr, but a tyrant. Not a pious woman, but a heartless fanatic. The nickname Bloody Mary was born in this context, a cruel, effective label designed to instill fear and disgust. This was no accident. Elizabeth needed to strengthen her legitimacy and the authority of Protestant England, and Mary was the perfect contrast, a weak, cruel queen defeated by faith and physical infirmity. Turning her into a villain was partly a political strategy, but it was also an expression of collective fear. Fear of a woman with absolute power who could plunge the entire country into chaos. That fear never completely disappeared. Mary's legacy was buried with her body. She left no descendants. She did not create an empire. She did not build great temples. She did not carry out reforms. What Mary left behind was not victories or reforms. She left trauma, an echo of fire and blood that lived in English memory for centuries. Stories of her persecution were passed down as warnings. English mothers of future generations frightened their children with her name, and the myth grew until it crossed oceans and centuries. The urban legend of Bloody Mary, a ghost summoned in front of a mirror in the dark, is not just a modern invention. It has its roots, albeit vague, in the ancient fear that MaryI inspired. Her name became a symbol of the forbidden, the dark, that which must not be awakened. The mirror, a key object in this legend, symbolizes what Mary never had, a clear reflection of herself. Her face has been distorted for centuries by hatred, fear, and propaganda. But if you remove these layers, who was Mary really? A victim of circumstances? A woman torn between faith and duty? A queen who did not know how to rule? Or someone who was simply never given a chance? Mary was not just a weak woman, nor was she a ruthless fanatic. She was a queen forged in solitude, hardened by betrayal, obsessed with regaining what had been taken from her. Her childhood was marked by her father's renunciation. Her youth was spent in endless uncertainty. Her adult life was under constant threat. And her reign was not a story of glory, but a desperate struggle to restore the world as she knew it. Catholic, orderly, fair to mothers, and unwilling to spill blood for power. And yet, in her quest to impose this world, she repeated the same mistakes that destroyed her childhood. She rejected those who rejected her. She humiliated those who humiliated her. She experienced the arbitrariness of power and used it herself without mercy. In her quest to save her soul and the soul of her country, she lost both. And in this, the most terrible tragedy of power was revealed. Even with a crown on her head, a person can remain a prisoner of forces beyond their control. Her decaying body became a perfect metaphor for this paradoxical fate, a queen who rotted away while still alive, consumed from within, like her faith, like her legitimacy, like her history. No artist captured her image in her final years. There are no official portraits showing her in decline, only rumors, only biased chronicles, only whispers, at court and in the streets. But even in this silence there is truth. History did not know how to remember her, because she did not fit into the mold. Mary was not Elizabeth. She was not Catherine. She was not Juana la Loca. She was Mary, one of a kind, disfigured inside and out, closer to the common people who feared her than to the nobility who betrayed her, more human perhaps than any other English ruler of her time. But history does not forgive weakness, especially weakness hidden under the guise of power, so her image remained not a memory, but a tool, not a memory, but a ghost. In the centuries that followed, more objective historians tried to restore her image. Some saw her as a queen with clear ideals and a spiritual understanding of the throne. Others saw her as a woman with a traumatized soul who projected her pain onto the country. Still others saw her as a victim of a system that never accepted her, an unwelcome daughter, a rejected wife, a misunderstood queen. But the problem remains. Marie cannot be pigeonholed. Her story is inconvenient because it disrupts simple narratives. She is not a heroine. Nor is she simply a villain. She is both, and neither one nor the other. Her face, hidden behind bandages, sores, and tears, remains a mystery. It is as if, even in death, she wanted to preserve at least something of herself, far from the judgments of others. Meanwhile, popular culture continued to turn her into a dark symbol. Video games, movies, books, all used her name as a synonym for horror, and almost no one stopped to wonder who the woman behind the name was. The myth became flesh. The queen who wanted to love her people ended up becoming an object of fear. The daughter who tried to redeem her mother's fate ended up betraying her own image. The mirror in which history looks at Mary is broken, and the shards reflect different versions of her, contradictory, incompatible, full of pain, but they all stem from the same feeling, fear. Because what is truly frightening is not illness, not bonfires, not a disfigured face. The real horror lies in what Mary symbolizes, the collapse of the noblest ideals when they are imposed without mercy. And yet Mary's story did not die with her. It lives on, in symbols, in fears, in mirrors that tremble when someone utters her name. Sometimes stories need a monster, but sometimes the monster is just a crooked mirror reflecting our collective guilt. MaryI, Queen of England, became such a symbol. She was burdened with fears that the people could not name, her father's sins, the traumas of the dynasty, the open wounds of the brutal Reformation, and deep prejudices against women in power. Her decaying body was not just a biological end. It was the final act of a tragedy written long before she was born. The English throne was not ready to accept her. The people were not ready to obey her. The faith was not ready to save her. Her figure crossed the boundaries of what a woman could and could not be in the 16th century. She was supposed to be a mother, but she did not give birth. A wife, but she was rejected. A queen, but she ruled with a trembling hand. And yet she tried, until the very end, until her skin cracked, until her belly swelled with death, until her face turned into that of a suffering saint. Even in her last days, when she could no longer walk without help, when her teeth fell out, when her breath smelled of decay, and her clothes had to be changed several times a day because of pus and blood, Mary continued to rule. She signed decrees. She listened to her advisors. It was as if she refused to give up, as if the physical pain was a continuation of her mental anguish, as if every heartbeat took away the last shred of her humanity. But her body no longer obeyed. It rebelled. It destroyed itself. The doctors threw up their hands. Some spoke of dropsy. Others spoke of internal tumors. But everyone avoided the main thing. The queen was rotting alive. The smell in her chambers did not come from incense. Her night cries were not revelations, but delirium. What was devouring her flesh was the same thing that had consumed her reign: blind faith, impossible hope, undivided love. The people, for their part, no longer mourned her. It was a hungry winter in the country. The people were suffering from taxes. Religious tensions were growing. There were whispers about Elizabeth. Everyone understood that the end was near, and with it, hope. Hope for a new era, for a Protestant revival, for a young, charismatic, strong queen. No one said it out loud, but everyone secretly waited for her death. And then one November morning, confirmation came. Mary Tudor, Queen of England, had died, without a cry, without close witnesses, with cold, empty hands, without a child to carry on her work, without a husband to mourn her, without a people who would remember her fondly. Her emaciated body was difficult to embalm. The smell was so bad that the coffin had to be closed immediately. The ceremonies were brief. History was merciless. But her death did not erase her legacy. On the contrary, it made it eternal, because sometimes it is decay that leaves the most lasting memory. The traces left by Mary proved stronger than fame. She became forever etched in the collective consciousness of England as a warning, as an example of what absolute power without wisdom leads to, as a reflection of the consequences of a reign based on resentment, unhealed wounds, and a desperate need to be loved at any cost. To this day, her name lives on, not as befits a queen, not in treatises or hymns, but in nightmares, in stories that children whisper to each other in front of the mirror. Bloody Mary, 3 times in the dark, as if her spirit is still seeking recognition, an answer, redemption, or maybe just someone's presence in her eternal pain. What if she really comes? What if this bleeding ghost in a blood-stained dress is not just a figment of the imagination? Perhaps it is something more. The echo of a queen who left without forgiveness, leaving her soul in the dark corridors of power, where no mirror reflects the whole truth. Maybe it is history itself, demanding justice, or maybe it is just a memory reminding us how thin the line is between holiness and damnation. Mary. I did not receive redemption during her lifetime. Her reign was short, full of tragedy, ruptures, and pain. But in her own way, she left a lesson that cannot be erased. Power without love decays, and love without power withers away. The crown does not heal a broken childhood. A country cannot be ruled by fear, only by truth. And a woman, even as a queen, remains human. Flesh, blood, tears, and in the end, ashes. And perhaps it is in these ashes that everything that can justify her is hidden. Memory. Not the memory of a monster, not of a legend, but of a woman. The one who was rejected by her father, betrayed by her husband, hated by her people, forgotten by history. The one who, despite the horror, continued to believe